The night before her wedding, Chidera received an anonymous text telling her to come to room 304 at the Golden Tulip Hotel, and when she arrived, she heard her groom, Osinachi, and her own cousin, Adaeze, her maid of honor, confessing that he was only marrying her for the baby and her inheritance. But it was worse than that. Osinachi admitted he'd murdered Chidera's father 6 months ago by poisoning him to get access to the family's land worth billions, and Adaeze was pregnant with Osinachi's child and had been helping him plan this fraud for 18 months with forged documents designed to steal everything after the wedding. So, Chidera stood outside that hotel room in the rain and recorded every single word as 6 minutes of confessions. Then she called her uncle, Emeka, who disappeared 3 years ago, hired the best lawyer in Lagos, assembled her father's old security team, and made a plan. She would go to the wedding, put on that dress, walk down that aisle in front of 400 witnesses, and play that recording through the cathedral sound system, using a device hidden in her bouquet. And now, while Osinachi stands at the altar thinking he's gotten away with murder, and Adaeze stands beside her cousin thinking she's untouchable, Chidera is about to show them both that some women don't stay victims. They become warriors, and in 30 seconds, everyone in that cathedral is about to hear the truth. Let's go to the cathedral. Now, before we continue, if you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button, like and drop a comment, because stories like this, where the victim becomes the victor, where the truth comes out in the most dramatic way possible, I post them every single week. St. Augustine's Cathedral rose from the heart of Victoria Island like God's own declaration that beauty and power could coexist in Lagos, a city where nothing coexisted except chaos and survival. Its white walls gleamed in the afternoon sun despite the earlier rain, its stained glass windows catching light and throwing colors across the marble steps where photographers were already stationed like soldiers awaiting royalty. 400 guests filled the pews. Chidera could hear them from the bride's preparation room, a small chamber at the back of the cathedral where brides had been having last-minute panic attacks for the past 70 years. The murmur of conversation, the rustle of expensive fabric, the occasional burst of laughter that echoed off vaulted ceilings, designed to make human voices sound closer to divine. She stood in front of a full-length mirror, her wedding dress perfect, her makeup flawless, her hands steady as she adjusted her veil for the 3rd time, even though it didn't need adjusting. Beside her, Adaeze was chattering. Chichi, you look absolutely stunning. Like a dream. Osinachi is going to cry when he sees you. I mean literally cry. Men always pretend they won't, but they always do. She laughed that same laugh Chidera had heard through the hotel door 12 hours ago. High, musical, poisonous. Chidera watched her cousin in the mirror's reflection. Adaeze wore a champagne-colored bridesmaid dress that somehow managed to make her look innocent, despite everything Chidera now knew. Her face showed no guilt, no hesitation, no awareness that in approximately 30 minutes, her entire life would detonate in front of everyone she'd ever known. You're glowing, Chidera said carefully, turning to face her cousin. Is it the makeup or something else? Adaeze's hand flew to her stomach, an unconscious gesture that lasted half a second before she caught herself. What? No, just happy for you. This is your day. Your big day. Our big day, Chidera corrected, and the double meaning hung in the air like smoke. We're family. We share everything, don't we? Something flickered behind Adaeze's eyes. Uncertainty, guilt, fear, but it disappeared before Chidera could name it. Always, Adaeze said, pulling Chidera into a hug that felt like betrayal wrapped in silk. Sisters forever. Chidera hugged her back and thought, in 30 minutes, you'll wish you'd never been born. A knock on the door interrupted the moment. It's time. The wedding coordinator announced an efficient woman named Missus Okonkwo, no relation to the groom, thankfully, who'd been managing society weddings in Lagos for 30 years and had the organizational skills of a military general. The groom is at the altar. The bridesmaids are lined up. The flower girls are ready. Chidera, your brother is waiting to walk you down the aisle. Chidera took a deep breath. This was it. The preparation room door opened onto a small hallway that connected to the main cathedral entrance. Kelechi stood there wearing a black tuxedo that made him look older, harder, more like the man he was becoming instead of the boy he'd been. When he saw Chidera, his jaw tightened, the only sign that he knew what was about to happen. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. Beyond ready, she replied, taking it. The bridesmaids filed out, first 4 of Chidera's university friends, wearing champagne dresses and carrying bouquets of white roses. Then Adaeze, the maid of honor, walking slowly, gracefully, smiling at guests as she passed. Enjoy the attention, Chidera thought. It's about to become a very different kind of attention. The wedding march began, the traditional organ music that had announced 1,000 brides, that had played at her parents' wedding, that was supposed to signal the beginning of happily ever after. The massive cathedral doors opened. 400 faces turned, and Chidera stepped into the light. The aisle stretched before her like a runway to Judgment Day. On both sides, guests rose to their feet, a wave of expensive fabrics and elaborate geles and faces she'd known her entire life. Her mother's friends, her father's business associates, Osinachi's family filling the right side of the church, her family filling the left, and in the middle, the space where 2 families were supposed to merge into one. She saw her mother in the front row, already crying happy tears, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief embroidered with the date. The 15th of May 2026, Chidera and Osinachi. She saw Uncle Emeka 3 rows back, his face neutral, but his eyes sharp, alert, ready. She saw Barrister Nkechi seated near the middle, her grey suit blending with the crowd, her tablet discreetly positioned in her lap. And at the altar, she saw him, Osinachi. He stood tall in a midnight blue tuxedo that had probably cost a fortune, his groomsmen flanking him like backup dancers in a performance nobody had asked for. His face, when he saw her mouth slightly open, eyes going wide, hand moving to his chest like his heart had just stopped, looked exactly like the reaction of a man in love seeing his bride for the first time. It was a perfect performance. She'd give him that. Chidera walked slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking on marble in perfect rhythm with the organ music. Each step brought her closer to the altar, closer to the man who'd murdered her father, closer to the cousin who'd betrayed her, closer to the moment when everything would change forever. Kelechi squeezed her arm once. Support. Solidarity. We're going to destroy them. She squeezed back. I know. They reached the altar. The priest, Father Benedict, a dignified man in his 60s who'd baptized Chidera as a baby, smiled warmly and gestured for everyone to sit. The organ music faded. 400 people settled into expectant silence. Osinachi took Chidera's hands in his. His palms were warm, dry, steady. His eyes searched her face with what looked like genuine emotion. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, he whispered, just loud enough for the front rows to hear. I'm the luckiest man alive. Chidera smiled. You have no idea what's about to happen. His brow furrowed slightly, confusion, suspicion. But before he could respond, Father Benedict cleared his throat and began. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Chidera Azubuike and Osinachi Okonkwo in holy matrimony. Marriage is a sacred bond, blessed by God, honored by man, and entered into with the purest of intentions. Chidera listened with half her attention. The other half was counting seconds. Uncle Emeka had positioned himself near the sound booth at the back of the cathedral, the place where the audio technician controlled all the microphones, all the speakers, all the sound that 400 people would hear. Barrister Nkechi had the audio file ready on her tablet. The 2 security men were stationed near the exits, just in case Osinachi or Adaeze tried to run. Everything was in place. Father Benedict continued. If anyone here knows any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace. The traditional pause. Nobody spoke. Nobody ever spoke during this part. It was ceremonial, symbolic, a formality left over from centuries past, when weddings were business arrangements and objections were about property rights, not love. But Chidera felt the weight of those words, like a physical thing pressing against her chest. I know a reason, she thought. About 12 reasons, actually, all recorded on a phone that's about to broadcast the truth to everyone in this room. Father Benedict smiled, satisfied with the silence. Then we proceed, Osinachi Okonkwo. Do you take this woman? A loud crackle of feedback cut through the cathedral. Everyone winced. The sound technician scrambled at his booth, trying to figure out what had gone wrong with the system that had worked perfectly during 3 sound checks. But Chidera knew exactly what had gone wrong. Or rather, what had gone exactly right. Uncle Emeka had just activated the override that Barrister Nkechi had programmed into the sound system that morning, while everyone was distracted with flower arrangements and seating charts. The lawyer had been many things in her career, but before law school, she'd been an audio engineer. And audio engineers knew how to make technology do exactly what they wanted, exactly when they wanted it. The feedback stopped. Then, from every speaker in the cathedral, a voice that 400 people recognized immediately. Osinachi's voice. Tomorrow, everything transfers automatically. Her name on the marriage certificate means my name on the deed. Community property law is beautiful that way. The congregation went utterly silent. Father Benedict's mouth hung open mid-sentence. The groomsmen looked at each other in confusion. Osinachi's face drained of all color, his hands dropping Chidera's like she'd suddenly caught fire. What? He started to say. But the recording kept playing. Adaize's voice, clear and unmistakable. And she has no idea. Chichi actually thinks you love her. Osinachi's laugh echoed through the cathedral. Love? I love the 20 acres in Lekki that'll be worth 5 billion in 3 years. I love the commercial properties in Abuja. I love the fact that her father's dead and her brother's an idiot who will sign anything I put in front of him. Do I love Chidera? She's tolerable, pretty enough, naive enough, perfect enough. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave of realization breaking against the shore of disbelief. Turn it off, Osinachi shouted, spinning toward the sound booth. Someone turned that off. But Uncle Emeka stood in front of the booth like a wall, arms crossed, face impassive. The recording continued. Perfect victim, Adieze's voice agreed. Though, I almost feel bad. She's my cousin. We grew up together. Every head in the cathedral turned to look at Adaize, who stood frozen at the altar beside Chidera, her face white as her dress should have been, her mouth opening and closing without sound. You'll feel better when you're holding your share of 2 billion naira. How's the baby? The baby. Chidera's mother made a sound like she'd been stabbed. Kicking. A lot. I think he knows his father's about to become very, very rich. Now the gasps turned to shouts. Women were standing, pointing, their faces twisted with shock and rage. Men were on their feet, looking between Osinachi and Adaize like they were watching a car accident in real time. But the recording wasn't done. The documents are ready, signed and notarized. The lawyer thinks they're legitimate transfers. I told him Chidera wanted to put everything in joint names as a wedding gift. Osinachi lunged toward the sound booth, but the 2 security men, Papa's old security men, stepped into his path. He tried to push past them. One of them grabbed his arm with the casual efficiency of someone who dealt with much more dangerous men than a fraudster in a tuxedo. Let me go, Osinachi screamed. This is illegal. This is defamation. This is... What about her brother, Kelechi? Kelechi's already halfway in the bag. I've been buying him drinks, taking him to clubs, making him dependent on my generosity. By the time this is over, He will be so grateful for whatever scraps we leave him that he won't even think about fighting. And if he does, well, accidents happen. Just ask Chidera's father. The cathedral went from chaos to absolute silence so fast it felt like the air itself had stopped moving. Chidera's mother stood up slowly from her seat, her face transformed into something Chidera had never seen before. Not grief, not shock, but pure, crystallized rage that made her look 10 feet tall. "What did he say?" Mama's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "What did that boy just say about my husband?" The recording answered for him. "You're sure the old man's really dead? Sometimes I wonder if I watched him die. Watched him drink the drink I made him. Watched him collapse. Watched the light leave his eyes. He's dead, Adaeze. Stop being paranoid." Murder. Confession of murder. Broadcast from every speaker in St. Augustine's Cathedral on what was supposed to be Chidera's wedding day. Osinachi stopped fighting against the security men. He turned to look at Chidera with eyes that had finally realized what was happening, who had done it, and how completely, utterly, irreversibly destroyed he was. "You," he whispered. "You were at the hotel." "Room 304, Chidera confirmed, her voice carrying in the silence. "Last night, around midnight. You were too busy planning how to steal my inheritance to notice me standing outside your door with my phone recording every single word. You can't do this." "I already did it, Osinachi. Everyone heard you. Everyone knows now. Everyone knows you murdered my father for land. Everyone knows you've been lying to me for 2 years. Everyone knows you're having a baby with my cousin while pretending to love me." She turned to Adaeze, who had collapsed against the altar like her bones had turned to water. "And you," Chidera continued, her voice still calm, still steady, still carrying to every corner of the cathedral. "You stood beside me this morning. You helped me get dressed. You told me it was going to be a perfect day. You called me sister while carrying the baby of the man who killed our uncle." Chichi, Adaeze, started, but whatever excuse she was about to offer died in her throat when she saw Chidera's face. There was no forgiveness there, no mercy, just the cold, clear certainty of someone who'd already made their decision and was now watching it execute perfectly. "Father Benedict," Chidera said, turning to the priest who looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past 5 minutes. "I don't think we'll be needing the rest of the ceremony. This wedding is cancelled. Permanently." She pulled the engagement ring off her finger. The 2-carat diamond that had cost Osinachi 6 months of salary, or so he'd claimed, though she now wondered if he'd bought it with money stolen from her father's accounts and threw it at his feet. It bounced once on the marble and rolled toward the first pew, where it stopped against Mama's shoe. Nobody moved to pick it up. "Chidera," Osinachi said, his voice desperate now, scrambling. "Listen to me. That recording, it's out of context. It was just talk. Stupid talk. I never would have." "You already did," Chidera interrupted. "You murdered my father. You stole 6 months of my life. You were about to steal everything my family built. But you made one mistake, Osinachi." "What mistake?" He sounded genuinely curious. Like even in his destruction, he needed to understand where he'd failed. "You underestimated me. You thought I was naive, trusting, too in love to see what was right in front of me. You thought I'd walk down this aisle like a lamb to slaughter." She smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "You were wrong." The cathedral doors opened. Police officers, 6 of them, led by a woman in a deputy commissioner's uniform, walked down the aisle with the kind of authority that made everyone in their path step aside automatically. "Osinachi Okonkwo," the deputy commissioner said, pulling out handcuffs that gleamed in the colored light from the stained glass windows. "You're under arrest for the murder of Chief Azubuike, conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft, and about 15 other charges that my officers will explain to you at the station. You have the right to remain silent." She continued reading his rights, while the other officers handcuffed him, But Chidera had stopped listening. She was watching Adaeze, who'd started crying not quiet tears but loud, gasping sobs that echoed through the cathedral. "I'm pregnant," Adaeze wailed. Like that fact should matter, should change things, should buy her sympathy from the crowd that was now looking at her with expressions ranging from disgust to pity to satisfaction at seeing justice served. "I'm carrying his baby. You can't do this to me. We're family. Chichi, we're family." "You stopped being my family," Chidera said coldly, "the moment you helped a man murder my father." Another pair of handcuffs. Another police officer. Adaeze's wrists locked behind her back while she screamed and cried and begged and finally, when none of that worked, cursed. "You're dead!" she shouted as the police led her toward the exit. "You hear me, Chidera? You're dead! You think this is over? It's not over. We'll get out. We'll come back. And you'll regret." "Ma'am," the police officer said tiredly, clearly having dealt with threats before. "You're making it worse. Please stop talking." But Adaeze didn't stop. Not until they dragged her all the way down the aisle, past 400 witnesses who would tell this story for the rest of their lives, past the photographers who'd captured every moment on camera, past Chidera's mother, who stood with her arms crossed and her face like stone, past Kelechi, who watched his cousin's downfall with no expression at all, past Uncle Emeka, who nodded once at Chidera, "Well done. You've made your father proud." And finally, out through the massive cathedral doors, into the afternoon sun, where a police van waited. The doors closed behind them. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 400 people sat in shocked silence, trying to process what they'd just witnessed. Then Chidera's mother walked to the altar. She stood in front of her daughter, her bride daughter, who was still wearing a wedding dress, still holding a bouquet, still technically at a wedding that was no longer happening, and pulled her into a hug so tight Chidera could barely breathe. "Your father," Mama whispered into her hair, "your father would be so proud of who you are, of what you did, of the strength it took to stand here and face them all." Chidera finally let herself cry. Not sad tears, not angry tears, but something else. Release. Relief. The tears of someone who'd been holding their breath for so long they'd forgotten what oxygen felt like. "I recorded it," she sobbed into her mother's shoulder. "Last night, I heard everything, and I recorded it, and I couldn't tell you because I needed to wait until—" "Shh," Mama soothed. I know, my daughter. You did what you had to do. You protected our family. You got justice for Papa. You did everything right." Father Benedict cleared his throat awkwardly. "Perhaps we should adjourn? I'm not certain what the protocol is for cancelled weddings, but I believe the reception venue needs to be informed." "Cancel it," Chidera said, pulling away from her mother and wiping her eyes, careful not to smudge the makeup that seemed suddenly absurd given everything that had just happened. "Cancel the reception. Cancel everything. There's nothing to celebrate." "Actually," Barrister Nkechi said, standing up from her seat and walking to the front, her tablet in hand and a satisfied expression on her face, "I'd argue there's plenty to celebrate. Justice, for one. Your father's name cleared. A murderer and a con artist in police custody. Your family's assets protected. And a young woman who proved herself to be the bravest person in this cathedral." She turned to address the crowd, her lawyer voice carrying authority even in a church. For anyone wondering about the legality of what just occurred, the recording was made in a location where the subjects had no reasonable expectation of privacy due to Ms. Azubuike's relationship with the groom. Furthermore, the confession of a capital crime, murder, negates any concerns about consent. The Nigerian Evidence Act supports this documentation, and copies of the full recording have been submitted to the appropriate authorities, including a special crimes unit that specializes in inheritance fraud. She smiled, sharp and professional. Mr. Okonkwo and Miss Adeze will not be bothering this family again. Not in this lifetime. Murmurs of approval rippled through the congregation. Some people actually clapped a slow, respectful applause that grew until most of the cathedral was joining in, clapping for a bride who'd blown up her own wedding to catch a killer. Chidera stood at the altar in her wedding dress, holding a bouquet, surrounded by applause she'd never expected, and thought, "Papa, I hope you're watching. I hope you know I didn't let them win. I hope you know your daughter is exactly as stubborn as you raised her to be." Uncle Emeka joined them at the altar, wrapping one massive arm around Chidera's shoulders. "Your father and I used to say that the Azubuike family had steel in their bones," he said quietly. "Today, you proved it. You've got his courage, his sense of timing, and his absolute refusal to let bad people profit from being bad. He's proud, Chichi. Wherever he is, he's standing up and cheering." Kelechi pushed through the crowd and pulled his sister into a hug that lifted her off the ground despite the wedding dress. "That," he said, laughing and crying at the same time, "was the most incredible thing I've ever seen. You destroyed them. You absolutely destroyed them. I recorded the whole thing on my phone. This is going viral. This is going to be legendary. Please, don't post it online." Chidera groaned, but she was smiling, actually smiling. For the first time in 12 hours, the weight on her chest had lifted enough to let joy peek through. "Too late," Kelechi replied, showing her his phone where he'd already uploaded a video titled, "Bride Exposes Groom's Murder Confession at Altar, Justice Served Live." It already had 15,000 views. Kelechi, what? The world deserves to know. Besides, this way everyone will hear Papa's story. Everyone will know he was murdered. Everyone will know justice was done. Isn't that what you wanted? It was, actually. Chidera looked around the cathedral at the guests who were now standing and talking, sharing theories and shock and satisfaction. At the photographers who'd captured everything. At Father Benedict, who was shaking his head in bewilderment. At her mother, who was accepting condolences and congratulations in equal measure. At Barrister Nkechi, who was already on her phone, presumably arranging the next steps of the legal process. And at herself, reflected in the gold-framed mirror near the altar, a bride without a groom, a daughter who'd avenged her father, a woman who'd turned her wedding into a courtroom and her heartbreak into justice. She looked exactly how she felt, powerful. 3 hours later, Chidera sat in her childhood bedroom, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, the wedding dress pulled on the floor like a discarded costume from a play that had ended differently than anyone expected. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from friends. "Oh my God, are you okay?" Messages from relatives. "We always knew something was off about that boy." Messages from strangers. "You're my hero. What you did took unbelievable courage." And one message from a number she didn't recognize. "I was wife number 3. He did the same thing to me 7 years ago. Different lies, same goal. Thank you for stopping him. Thank you for making sure he'll never do this to another woman. You saved lives today." Chidera stared at that message for a long time. Wife number 3. Osinachi had done this before. Maybe not murder, or maybe he had, and they just hadn't caught him. But the fraud, the manipulation, the targeting of women with money and dead fathers and vulnerable families. She'd stopped him. But how many women had he destroyed before her? A soft knock on her door. "Come in," she called, expecting her mother or Kelechi. Instead, Uncle Emeka entered, carrying 2 bottles of Guinness and looking like he had something important to say. "I figured you could use this," he said, handing her a bottle. "And I figured I owed you an explanation." "About what?" "About why I left Lagos 3 years ago. About why I disappeared from your life right when your father needed me most." He sat on the edge of her bed, his large frame making the mattress deep. "You know your father and I were partners in the early days." We built the real estate business together. Made our first millions together. We're closer than brothers. I know. What you don't know is that 3 years ago, we discovered something. A corruption ring that went all the way to the governor's office. They were seizing private land through fraudulent court orders, then reselling it to developers for massive profits. Your father wanted to expose them. I wanted to as well. But they threatened us. Said if we went public, we'd both have accidents. Chidera went very still. Accidents? Your father refused to back down, so they went after him first. Made it look like a heart attack. By the time I realized what had happened, it was too late. They came for me next. I had to choose stay and die, or live and live to fight another day. Uncle Emeka took a long drink. I chose to live, and I've hated myself for it every single day since. Does Mama know? Your mother knows everything. She's the one who told me to run. Said she couldn't lose both of us. He looked at Chidera with eyes that had seen too much and carried too much guilt. But now I'm back. And now we're going to finish what your father started. The corruption ring? Osinachi was small time. A nobody who read about your father's death in the papers and saw an opportunity. But the people who actually killed Papa, they're still out there, still stealing, still hurting families. And with the evidence we got from Osinachi, with the lawyer he used, the documents he forged, the whole network of fraud, we can trace it back to them. Chidera felt something ignite in her chest. Not anger this time, purpose. Tell me how. Uncle Emeka smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. That's my goddaughter, your father's daughter, always ready to fight. They talked for 2 hours. About Papa, about the corruption ring, about how the fight wasn't over, just beginning, about how justice for Osinachi was only the first step. By the time Uncle Emeka left, Chidera had a new mission, a new reason to wake up tomorrow. But first, tonight, she had something else to do. At 9 p.m., she knocked on the door of the guest house where Adaeze had been living. Nobody answered. Obviously, Adaeze was in a holding cell at the Lagos State Police Command, probably still screaming about how unfair everything was. Chidera used her spare key to let herself in. The space was exactly as Adaeze had left it that morning. Makeup scattered across the bathroom counter, her bridesmaid dress hanging on a hook, her laptop open on the desk. Chidera sat at the desk and opened the laptop. It wasn't password protected. Typical Adaeze, trusting to a fault, never imagining anyone would go through her things. The browser history was still open. Searches for Community Property Law, Nigeria, How to Transfer Land Titles, Inheritance Fraud Techniques, Emails to Osinachi, going back 18 months. Before he'd even proposed to Chidera, plans, strategies, discussions about the long game, and patience, and making sure she trusts us completely before we strike. And one email that made Chidera's blood run cold. From Adaeze, Azubuike, to Osinachi Okonkwo. Subject: She's getting suspicious. Date: 2 weeks ago. Chichi asked me weird questions today about why I'm always defending you when Kelechi makes jokes. I think she's starting to notice how close we are. Should we move the timeline up? Get married sooner? I'm nervous. What if she finds out about the baby before the wedding? What if she finds out about her father? I know we agreed to wait, but I'm scared. I love the money, but I love my cousin too. This is harder than I thought it would be. Osinachi's response: Don't go soft on me now. We're too close. The wedding is in 2 weeks. After that, everything is legally ours. If she finds out before then, we'll deal with it. But she won't. She's too trusting, too naive, too in love. And Adaeze, the cousin you love, she's going to be a very rich woman soon. That should help with the guilt. Chidera closed the laptop carefully, like it might explode. Her cousin hadn't just betrayed her for money. She'd betrayed her despite loving her, despite knowing it was wrong, despite feeling guilty. She'd done it anyway. That, somehow, was worse than if Adaeze had hated her. Chidera locked the guest house, pocketed the laptop, and walked back to the main house where her mother was making tea in the kitchen, despite it being 10 p.m. "Can't sleep?" Mama asked, pouring 2 cups without waiting for an answer. "Can you?" "Not tonight. Maybe not for many nights." Mama handed her a cup and they sat at the kitchen table where Chidera had eaten breakfast every morning of her childhood. "But at least tonight, I can sleep knowing your father's killer is in jail." They sat in companionable silence, drinking tea, not needing to fill the space with words. Finally, Mama spoke. "What will you do now?" "What do you mean?" "You're 28 years old. You were supposed to get married today. Instead, you exposed a murderer, sent your cousin to prison, and became a viral sensation. The question is, what comes next?" Chidera thought about it. About Papa's corruption case. About Uncle Emeka's plan. About the other women Osinachi had hurt. About justice that still needed serving. "I'm going to finish what Papa started," she said finally. "I'm going to help Uncle Emeka take down the people who really killed him. And then," she paused, considering, "then I'm going to help other women. Women like the one who texted me. Women who've been targeted by men like Osinachi. I'm going to use Papa's money, my money now, to fund a legal defense foundation. Free lawyers for women fighting fraud and manipulation and inheritance theft." Mama's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Your father would love that. He always said money was only good if it helped people who needed it. Plus," Chidera added, "I need something to do now that my wedding's been cancelled. Might as well burn down a few more corrupt systems while I'm at it." They laughed real laughter, the kind that helps heal wounds that aren't ready to close yet but at least ready to start trying. Upstairs, Chidera's phone buzzed with a new notification. Kelechi's video had gone viral. 3 million views. The story was trending on Twitter Nigeria. News outlets were calling for interviews. Someone had made a meme of Osinachi's face when the recording started playing. But the comment that caught Chidera's attention was from a verified account, a women's rights organization. "This is what courage looks like. This is what happens when women refuse to be silent. This is what justice sounds like when it's served publicly, loudly, and without apology. Chidera Azubuike, you are an inspiration. Thank you for showing us that we don't have to accept betrayal quietly. Thank you for fighting back." Chidera screenshot the comment and sent it to Uncle Emeka with a message. "Papa taught me to fight. Today I learned I'm good at it. Tomorrow, let's get even better." His response came immediately. "That's my warrior. Welcome to the family business. Your father's legacy lives on." She looked at her wedding dress, still crumpled on the floor, thousands of dollars of silk and lace, and dreams that had turned out to be lies. Tomorrow, she'd donate it. Let some other woman wear it to a wedding that would hopefully end better than hers had. Tonight, she was done being a bride. Tonight, and every night after, she was something else entirely. A fighter. A truth teller. A woman who turned her wedding into a war zone and walked away victorious. Mrs. Okonkwo had died at the altar. But Chidera Azubuike, daughter, warrior, justice seeker, had been reborn. The courtroom was packed. Chidera sat in the gallery wearing a navy suit that meant business, her hair pulled back in a professional bun, her face showing none of the nervousness churning in her stomach. Osinachi stood in the defendant's box, wearing an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller, somehow diminished. Like Jill had shrunk him down to his actual size instead of the inflated version he'd presented to the world. His eyes found hers across the courtroom. She didn't look away. The judge, a formidable woman in her 60s, named Justice Okonkwo, still no relation, read the verdict in a voice that echoed off the walls. Osinachi Okonkwo, this court finds you guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Chief Azubuike. Additionally, you are found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted theft, forgery, and multiple counts of inheritance manipulation. The court sentences you to life imprisonment without possibility of parole for 25 years. Life imprisonment. 25 years minimum. Osinachi would be an old man before he saw freedom again, if he lived that long. He collapsed in the defendant's box, his lawyer catching him before he hit the floor. In the gallery, Chidera's mother squeezed her hand. Kelechi pumped his fist silently. Uncle Emeka nodded once justice delivered. Furthermore, Justice Okonkwo continued, regarding Miss Adaeze Azubuike, who pleaded guilty to conspiracy and accessory to fraud, this court sentences her to 15 years imprisonment with consideration for her cooperation with authorities and her condition. Adaeze stood in her own defendant's box. Visibly pregnant now, 7 months along, the baby growing inside her while she'd been sitting in a cell, learning what consequences felt like. She looked nothing like the glamorous woman who'd stood beside Chidera at the altar. Her face was drawn, her skin had lost its glow, her eyes were hollow. She didn't look at Chidera, hadn't looked at her once during the entire trial. Chidera wondered if it was shame or strategy. Probably both. The child. Justice Okonkwo said, her voice softening slightly, the only moment of humanity in an otherwise ironclad ruling, will be delivered in a secure medical facility. After birth, custody will be determined by family court. Miss Azubuike, you will be eligible for parole after serving 10 years, provided you demonstrate genuine rehabilitation and remorse. 10 years. Adaeze would be 37 when she got out. Her baby would be 10 years old. A whole childhood missed. A whole decade of consequences for one terrible choice made over and over again for 18 months. The gavel came down with a sound like finality. Court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed like locusts. Miss Azubuike, how do you feel about the verdict? Chidera, do you have any message for other women who've been defrauded? Will you pursue civil charges? What about your relationship with your cousin's child? Barrister Nkechi stepped forward, blocking Chidera from the microphones with her body like a professional shield. My client is satisfied with the court's decision, she announced in her lawyer voice. Justice has been served for Chief Azubuike and for all victims of inheritance fraud. We have no further comment at this time except to say that the Azubuike Foundation for Women's Legal Defense, established in Chief Azubuike's honor, is now accepting applications for free legal representation in cases of financial manipulation, fraud, and inheritance theft. More information can be found on our website. She guided Chidera through the crowd like a general leading troops through enemy territory, Uncle Emeka and Kelechi flanking them, creating a protective wall of family until they reached the car. Only when they were safely inside, doors locked, did Chidera finally exhale. It's over, she whispered. It's actually over. The criminal case is over, Barrister Nkechi corrected from the front seat. The civil suit will take another year. But yes, the hard part is done. Your father's murderer will spend the rest of his functional life in prison. Your cousin will serve serious time. And you? She turned to look at Chidera with something like pride. You've started a foundation that's already helped 17 women in 6 months. You've become a voice for victims of fraud. And you've proven that silence is never the answer. Chidera looked out the window at Lagos traffic, chaotic and alive, and exactly the same as it had been 6 months ago when her world was exploding. Everything had changed. Nothing had changed. She was still Chidera Azubuike, still living in the house where she grew up, still running her father's real estate business, which had, surprisingly, thrived since the publicity of the trial. Still single, still healing, still figuring out how to trust people again. But different too. Stronger, clearer, sure of herself in ways she'd never been before she'd stood at that altar and detonated her life in front of 400 witnesses. What are you thinking? Kelechi asked from beside her. I'm thinking, Chidera said slowly, about the woman who texted me. Wife number 3. I wonder how many others there are. Women Osinachi destroyed before me. Women who never got justice because they didn't have evidence or money or the kind of rage that turns into action. You can't save everyone, Mama said gently from the other side. No, Chidera agreed. But I can save some, and some is better than none. Her phone buzzed. A message from the foundation's hotline, the 24/7 number they'd set up for women needing help. My fiancé is pressuring me to sign over my late father's property before our wedding. He says it's about trust. Something feels wrong. Can you help? Chidera showed the message to Barrister Nkechi. We can help, the lawyer said immediately. Tell her to come to the office tomorrow. Don't sign anything. Bring any documents he's given her. We'll look into it. Chidera typed back. Yes, we can help. You're not alone. You're not crazy. And you're not the first woman to feel this way. Come to our office tomorrow at 10 a.m. Address is below. Bring nothing but yourself and any papers he's asked you to sign. We'll take it from there. The response came immediately. Thank you. I thought I was being paranoid. Thank you for believing me. She's not paranoid, Chidera said to no one in particular. She's smart. She's listening to that voice that tells you when something's wrong. The voice I almost ignored. But you didn't ignore it, Uncle Emeka reminded her. You listened, you acted, you won, and now you're teaching other women to do the same. They drove in silence for a while, Lagos unfolding around them, street vendors, Okada riders, billboards advertising everything from churches to skin creams, the perpetual hustle of a city that never stopped moving because stopping meant falling behind. What about the baby? Kelechi finally asked the question nobody else wanted to voice. Adeize's baby, I guess technically your cousin's baby with your ex-fiancé. What happens to that kid? Chidera had thought about this. Every day for 6 months, she thought about it. A baby who hadn't asked to be born into this chaos. A baby whose father was a murderer and whose mother was a conspirator. A baby who would grow up knowing their parents were in prison for destroying their own family. Family court will decide, she said finally. But if they ask me if they want to know what I think should happen, I'll tell them the truth. Which is, that baby is innocent. That baby is family, whether I like it or not. That baby deserves a chance at a life that isn't defined by what their parents did. Chidera looked at her mother. If they ask us to take custody, we will, Mama said firmly. Of course we will. That child carries Azubuike blood, however complicated the circumstances. We don't punish children for their parents' sins, even if it means raising the child of the woman who helped kill Papa. Especially then, Mama replied. Because that's what your father would have done. He believed in redemption, in second chances, in breaking cycles, instead of perpetuating them. And that child, your cousin's child, deserves a chance to be raised by people who will teach them about honor and integrity and how to be better than their parents were. Chidera felt something release in her chest, a tension she didn't know she'd been carrying. Okay, she said. Okay, if they ask, we'll take the baby. But she held up a finger. I get to name them, and the name is going to be Chibuike. God is strength. Because that kid is going to need all the strength they can get. Chibuike, Azubuike. Kelechi tested the name. It works. It's strong. Papa would approve. They arrived at the house, the same house where Chidera had lived her whole life, where she'd gotten ready for a wedding that never happened, where she'd discovered evidence of murder and conspiracy and betrayal. But also, where she'd been loved, where she'd been raised, where she'd learned to fight. Inside, the staff had prepared a small celebration, nothing elaborate, just family and close friends, food and drinks, and the kind of low-key gathering that said, we're glad this chapter is finally closed. Uncle Emeka raised a glass of champagne. To Chief Azubuike, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Who taught us that integrity matters more than money? Who built something real in a city of illusions? Who raised a daughter strong enough to bring down the man who killed him? Papa, if you're watching, and I know you are, know that your work isn't finished. We're just getting started. To Papa, everyone echoed, glasses raised. Chidera drank and felt the bubbles burn, going down, cleansing, purifying, washing away the last 6 months of trials and testimonies, and reliving the worst night of her life over and over again in front of strangers. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from a number she recognized, one of the women who'd been defrauded by Osinachi years before she'd met him. I watched the verdict live. Thank you for what you did. Thank you for making sure he'll never hurt another woman. Because of you, I can finally sleep at night. Because of you, I can finally stop being afraid. You didn't just save yourself, you saved all of us. Chidera screenshot it and pinned it to her phone's home screen, right below a photo of her father. These were the messages that mattered. These were the women who mattered. These were the reasons she'd stood at that altar and pressed play on a recording that could have gone wrong in 1,000 different ways. But it hadn't gone wrong. It had gone exactly right. What are you smiling about? Kelechi asked, appearing beside her with a plate of jollof rice and chicken. I'm thinking about how 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. I thought I'd lost everything: my father, my fiancé, my future, my trust in people. And now? Now I realize I didn't lose anything that mattered. I lost things that were killing me slowly. And in losing them, I found something better. Which is? Chidera looked around the room at her mother, laughing with Barrister Nkechi, at Uncle Emeka telling stories to cousins who'd been too young to remember Papa but were learning about him now, at Kelechi growing into the man Papa had always believed he could be. Purpose, she said finally. I found purpose. Papa left me money and property and a legacy, but what he really left me was a mission, and I'm just getting started. Kelechi grinned. That's my sister. The woman who turned her wedding into a war zone and somehow came out the other side more powerful than before. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. You chose to fight. That's what makes you dangerous. Good, Chidera replied. The corrupt systems in this country need dangerous women, and I plan to be the most dangerous of them all. She meant it. The office of the Azubuike Foundation for Women's Legal Defense occupied the entire 3rd floor of a building in Ikoyi that used to house her father's real estate company. Chidera had converted it into something new, bright, welcoming, filled with female lawyers and paralegals and women who'd been victims themselves and now helped other victims navigate the legal system. On the wall behind Chidera's desk hung a photo of Papa, not a formal portrait, but a candid shot of him laughing at some family gathering, his head thrown back, his joy uncontained. Below it, a plaque. In memory of Chief Azubuike, who taught us that the greatest wealth is integrity, the greatest power is truth, and the greatest legacy is the people you help along the way. Chidera sat at her desk reviewing case files when her assistant knocked. There's someone here to see you, she said. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's urgent. She says her wedding is tomorrow, and she just found out something about her fiancé. Chidera felt a chill run down her spine. Déjà vu that was both familiar and terrible. Send her in. The woman who entered was young, maybe 25, wearing jeans and a t-shirt, her eyes red from crying, her hands shaking as she clutched a folder. Miss Azubuike, she said, her voice breaking. I don't know if you can help me. My wedding is tomorrow. I just discovered he's been lying about everything. His job, his family, his name, everything. And when I confronted him, he said if I don't marry him tomorrow, he'll release private photos of me that he took without my permission. He says he'll destroy my reputation. He says I have no choice. Chidera stood up, walked around the desk, and took the woman's hands in hers. You always have a choice, she said firmly, and you just made the right one by coming here. Sit down. Tell me everything. And I promise you, he will not win. Men like him only have power when women stay silent. And you just stopped being silent. The woman started crying relief, mixed with fear, mixed with hope. Can you really help me? My wedding is tomorrow. Everyone's coming. My family will be so ashamed. Shame belongs to people who do shameful things. Chidera interrupted. Not to people who escape them. Your family will understand. And if they don't, you build a new family from people who do. Trust me, I know from experience. She handed the woman a tissue, pulled up a chair, and opened a fresh legal pad. Now, she said. Pen poised. Tell me his name. Tell me what he's done. And let's start building your case. As the woman began to speak haltingly at first, then faster, the words pouring out like she'd been holding them in too long. Chidera thought about the night she'd stood outside room 304 with her phone pressed to the door. That night had broken her and rebuilt her into a woman who helped other women escape the same fate, into a legacy that would outlive her father, her pain, and every man who thought they could silence women who knew the truth. Outside her window, Lagos continued its perpetual chaos, traffic and noise, and millions of people hustling to survive another day. But up here, in this office, in this moment, justice was being served one woman at a time. And Chidera Azubuike, daughter of a murdered man, survivor of a fraudulent engagement, founder of a movement that was changing lives, smiled and started writing. The war wasn't over. It would never be over. But today, right now, they were winning.